Part 4, the other middle marks.
The next two punctuation marks we're going to talk about, the semicolon and the colon, seem to be trickier than the comma, but they're really not. Let's take a look at the semicolon.
Section A, the semicolon.
Here's a semicolon. It looks like a period sitting on top of a comma. If a period is a stop sign and a comma is a yield sign, then what in the world's a semicolon? Think of it as a bridge. Like a period, it separates two independent clauses, or complete sentences. But like a comma, it kind of joins pieces of a bigger idea together. So it's sort of like a connector and a divider.
Semicolons take two independent clauses with balanced ideas and combine them into one big compound sentence. So if the two things you're trying to connect are both independent clauses and their ideas balance each other, think about using a semicolon. Let's look at a semicolon in a sentence, then see exactly what it's doing.
Mama Napoli adds basil to her sauce to mellow the flavor. She adds paprika for zest. How delicious! Here we have Mama Napoli adding herbs to her famous sauce. We have three independent clauses. Mama Napoli adds basil to her sauce to mellow the flavor. She adds paprika for zest. And how delicious! Notice how the first two seem to complement each other. By using a semicolon, we can connect them while letting them remain separate. We could also have used a period. Either is correct.
Also, look at how we didn't capitalize the S in she. When you use a semicolon to link two sentences, you're pretty much combining them into one big compound sentence. So since she isn't the first word of its own sentence anymore, there's no need to capitalize it.
Remember when we talked about using commas in lists? We said that commas are pretty much just standing in for the word and. Well, we can use a similar trick to see if we can use a semicolon to join two sentences. If you can add the word furthermore to the beginning of the second sentence, you can use a semicolon. We call this the semicolon feasibility investigation through utilization of a conjunction, but you can call it the furthermore test.
Here are our first two sentences. Let's use the furthermore test and see what we get. Mama Napoli adds basil to her sauce to mellow the flavor. Furthermore, she adds paprika for zest. That makes sense. The two ideas are related and balanced, but could we put a semicolon between she adds paprika for zest and how delicious? Let's see. She adds paprika for zest. Furthermore, how delicious? Well, that doesn't really work. That's because while the two sentences are closely related, the ideas aren't really balanced, so no semicolon.
Using semicolons to create compound sentences really isn't as tricky as everyone thinks. In fact, the only major mistake you can make is to try to use a semicolon to join an independent clause and a dependent clause.
And the best way to avoid this kind of mistake is to scan your semicolon sentences for subordinating conjunctions. And remember when we talked about commas? We told you that a subordinating conjunction is any conjunction that you can put in front of a sentence that keeps it from being able to stand alone, like because, while, and until.
When we wrote, although Jennifer loves to talk on the telephone, she is never one to gossip, we used a comma to separate the dependent clause, although Jennifer loves to talk on the telephone, from the independent clause, she is never one to gossip. Sometimes it's tempting to try to use a semicolon instead of a comma, especially when the dependent clause comes right after the independent clause. But as we now know, if both clauses aren't independent, we can't use a semicolon.
Suppose we wrote everything was fine, semicolon, until I cloned myself. When we scan this sentence for subordinating conjunctions, do-de-do-de-do-de-do. Aha! There's one right there. The word until kicks off the second clause. Hey, wait a minute. That means the second clause can't stand alone. Until I cloned myself isn't an independent clause. But if it's not a complete sentence, we can't use a semicolon. And since it's not introducing this sentence, we don't even need a comma. We should write everything was fine until I cloned myself. No semicolon, no comma, no nothing. Simple, short, and sweet.
So far we've talked about using a semicolon to show balance between two ideas. Now let's talk about how they can be used to avoid confusion in lists.
We already know that commas can be used to separate items in a list. In the sentence, Reginald's mom made him clean his room, pick up some things at the grocery store, wash the car, and feed the lampreys, we've used commas to separate the 4 chores Reginald has to do, which are clean his room, pick up some things at the grocery store, wash the car, and feed the lampreys. Nothing too hard, just a bunch of simple phrases.
But suppose we change the construction of the items in our list, so now we have clean his room, remembering to vacuum under his bed, pick up some things at the grocery store, especially milk and juice, wash the car, and feed the lampreys. Some of these items already have commas, so if we use more commas to try to separate them, we'll get Reginald's mom made him clean his room, remembering to vacuum under his bed, pick up some things at the grocery store, especially milk and juice, wash the car, and feed the lampreys.
Pretty confusing, huh? When we're listing a bunch of phrases like this that already contain commas, we can use semicolons to separate them like this. Reginald's mom made him clean his room, remembering to vacuum under his bed, pick up some things at the grocery store, especially milk and juice, wash the car, and feed the lampreys. Since the commas are busy clarifying what we mean within the items, the semicolons help the commas out by separating the items in the list. See how much easier it is to read with semicolons?
When we decide to go the semicolon route, we have to use them all the way through the sentence, even though the last two items in our list don't even have a comma. So once you start using semicolons in a list, we have to use them all the way through to the end.
Let's take a call from Carol in Des Moines.
Hello?
Hello, Carol in Des Moines?
Bob? Susie?
We can hear you. Tell us about your semicolons.
Susie, they're a dream come true. A dream! I use them to connect two independent clauses that are related and balanced.
And those lists.
When I'm trying to separate stuff that has a bunch of commas, I just pull out my semicolons.
Anything else?
Yeah, I use them to scare away vampires.
Vampires. I love that movie. That Karen Carpenter's a great director.
Semicolons are punctuation marks that show balance between two related sentences. They can only be used to link two independent clauses into one big compound sentence. According to the furthermore test, when we're unsure as to whether or not it's okay to use a semicolon, we can substitute the word furthermore for the semicolon to see if the sentences still make sense. Another important use of semicolons is to separate items in a list, but only when one or more of the items already contain commas.
Section B, the colon.
A colon looks just like a semicolon, except that the period is sitting on another period instead of a comma. Basically, a colon is used after a sentence to say, okay, now I'm going to elaborate on what I just told you. It's always used after an independent clause, but whatever follows can either be another complete sentence, a dependent clause, or even just a list of words and phrases.
In that way, it's different from a semicolon. Remember that semicolons can only link two independent clauses. Colons can link whatever you want to the end of an independent clause.
After years of searching, Todd has finally discovered what he should do with his life. He will become the greatest origami master ever. In this sentence, there are two parts. Before the colon we have, after years of searching, Todd has finally discovered what he should do with his life. Then we have a colon which tells us, and here it is, then he will become the greatest origami master ever. Here we've joined two independent clauses, but remember that when you use a colon, the second part doesn't have to be an independent clause. We could have said, after years of searching, Todd has finally discovered what he should do with his life, origami. Now, we just have one little word coming after the colon, and you know what? That's just fine.
So the colon is pretty much just telling us, and here it is. Or if what we're talking about is plural, and here they are.
If you can say, and here it is, or, and here they are, after an independent clause, and whatever comes after it makes sense, you can use a colon. Let's try it on a couple of sentences. My mama gave me good advice. You can't hurry love. Well, let's see. My mama gave me good advice. And here it is. You can't hurry love. That works. This is a great place for a colon. My mama gave me good advice. You can't hurry love. Let's try another one.
You can't hurry love. You just have to wait. Let's see. You can't hurry love, and here it is. You just have to wait. Nope, since that doesn't make sense, we probably wouldn't want to put a colon there. But wait a second. Let's see if we can use a semicolon by trying the furthermore test. You can't hurry love. Furthermore, you just have to wait. Hey, that works. You can't hurry love. You just have to wait. It looks like what we want here is a semicolon, not a colon.
As you can see, there's a lot of meaning packed into those two little dots. Up until now, all of the colons we've used have come right after an independent clause, which is where you'll usually see them. But colons have so much implied meaning that sometimes you can use them in a sentence fragment, and the fragment can stand as a complete sentence.
What the?
Mamma mia!
Don't panic. You see this all the time. Look at the sentence, Clarissa has many phobias. An example, clownophobia. Notice how an example, clownophobia, is a fragment. It doesn't have a verb. But because colons are so cool, we can get away with this. It's almost as if we're saying, Clarissa has many phobias. An example, here it is, clownophobia. When we're allowed to use a fragment like this as a complete sentence, we call it a permitted fragment.
As you can see from our example, permitted fragments with colons usually pop up when you're ready to begin a list. In our example, we're dealing with a list of 1, but it's still a list. What the colon is doing here is sort of acting like a verb, since its implied meaning is, here it is, or here they are. So if the colon is replacing a verb at the beginning of a list, we don't need to use a verb. Now let's look at a couple of ways colons can be used and abused.
In our sentence about Clarissa, we may have been tempted to write, Clarissa has many phobias. An example is, clownophobia. Now we have a verb and a colon, which makes this construction wrong. There are two ways we could fix this problem. We could use a colon and nix the verb is, or keep the is and get rid of the colon, but we can't keep the colon and the verb.
When you're faced with a decision like this, look at both options and remember that simpler is usually better. While colons are great, it's not usually worth changing your whole sentence around and tossing out a verb just to accommodate a lovely colon. Let's look at another example.
Some of the most important players in the Smurf political arena are Papa Smurf, Handy Smurf, Hefty Smurf, Smurfette.
Here we have a list with both a colon and a verb. It's so tempting to stick a colon in here because of the way we listed all of the Smurf politicos beneath the rest of the sentence. But we can't use the verb and the colon. We have two ways to fix it. 1, get rid of the colon like this, or 2, tweak the first part of the sentence and then ditch the verb like this. There are many important players in the Smurf political arena. Papa Smurf, Handy Smurf, Hefty Smurf, Smurfette. Both of these are correct, just as long as we don't use both the verb and the colon.
That wraps up the section on colons. The take-home point is that they usually just mean here it is or here they are. We've also talked about some of the rules we have to follow when using colons. Don't you just love them?
Congratulations, you've made it through the rest of the middle marks. Let's review what we've learned about semicolons and colons.
Colons are used to tag additional information to the end of an independent clause. By using the "and here it is" test, we can check to make sure we've used a colon properly. It doesn't matter what comes after the colon, but whatever comes before the colon must be an independent clause. There's one exception. Colons have so much implied meaning that occasionally they can serve as the verb in a sentence fragment. These are called permitted fragments and are an allowed sentence form in SEAE.
And those are some of the marks that come in the middle of a sentence, the semicolon and the colon. Live them, love them, use them every day.